So I got a question from this poor mama who seemed to be in a great deal of disbelief that I get done with what I do get done in a day and a week, and all of it with my kids around. I don't think she even knew that I homeschooled for 14 years and have been homeschooling. She wondered if I send my kids off with grandparents or something like that so that I can get things done around the house. But then she went on to explain something that made everything that she asked make sense. She explained that she was an orphan and things just seemed really impossible for her right now, and she's just trying to find possible. I don't know about you, but I can definitely relate to that. In fact, the biggest reason I started my blog and this YouTube channel was for people just like her. I wanted people like her to know that they are not alone. I think for me, one of the breaking points was when my third child was born, and then again after my fourth. I remember trying to manage meal times along with having a really tiny rundown home, trying to take care of the kids, homeschooling and parenting, and I remember thinking, is this some kind of joke? How do people do this? Growing up, I had always seen and known a lot of homeschooling mothers who always seemed to have it together. But not long after my fourth was born, I remember all of the pressure of all of those things just really got to me, and I remember hitting a really low place. We were living in the Midwest, of course, and I did not have any support whatsoever. In fact, I had discouragement, where support usually is for a lot of families. That is a long story in itself, which I'll skip for now. But I will say I had been dealing with a lot of trauma from some extended family situations. So there was that on top of things. So essentially, what I'm trying to say is I never really had anybody to pick up the phone and call on to help out with my kids. To say those were tough times would be a gross understatement. As time went on, little by little though, I found encouragement, bits and pieces here and there. And I found this encouragement in places like YouTube, blogs, books that I read, and of course, through my faith in God. And eventually, as the children started to get a little bit older, it slowly started to get a little bit easier. Something happens in those really hard times, though, where you're working so hard for your family. Little by little, I grew stronger. When this starts to happen, you don't always notice it, though. See, as I grew stronger, I didn't realize I was growing stronger. It wasn't until I met some mamas who were just getting started in their journey and struggling with problems that I had learned to overcome years prior. Eventually, I learned how to say things like, instead of I can't do this, that I'm still learning. And instead of saying I give up, I started learning to say, are there other strategies that might make this work better? I used to struggle with a lot of feelings of being a failure, and instead of dwelling on those, I started counting the areas that I had succeeded in, and I started to realize that although I felt like a failure, I wasn't done yet. and I was judging the situation that was half finished. I want to share just a couple tips for those that are just feeling way over their heads and very overwhelmed. And these are some things that I learned from therapy that I would like to share with you today. If you're feeling super overwhelmed, try stepping back and just analyzing the situation. What is it about the situation that is making you feel this way? Another thing that I've learned to do is to take smaller steps. I've learned how if you just do what little you can, it all adds up eventually. Prioritizing. It's huge. Make a list. What is most important to you? You can make a list of what's most important and focus on finishing one thing at a time that really needs to be done first. It can be helpful. And another thing is realizing that if you've got a lot of little kids, what used to be a 5-minute project could take you an hour to 2 hours. That's a big one. On that same note, something that is really big is to learn to set boundaries. It's okay to tell people no. It's okay not to answer the door. It's okay not to answer the phone. It's okay to take your time to answer a text and really think about whether or not you can fit in those requests that people are asking of you.
We got time on our side. We're in a state of home. I need you on my fire.
Another thing is to stop multitasking. The older you get, the harder it gets to balance many things at one time. They've done studies and found that it's actually not even possible to multitask. You really actually are only doing one thing at a time. So accepting that you can only do one thing at a time because you're only one person is very helpful. And practicing gratitude is something that can really help you realize how blessed you are and how much you are getting done. And last, but definitely not least, self-care. It's really important to take a few minutes to breathe and ground yourself every day, preferably early. It's a good idea to go over things you would like to accomplish today and that you need to accomplish. And if you write them down, it's very helpful because once the day gets started and busy and your brain starts to get a little bit overloaded, all you'll need to do is go back to the list. It's important when you're practicing self-care to consider how you're feeling and what your needs are for the day. You need vitamins, you need your water, maybe tea, you need food. And these are areas that I see a lot of stay-at-home mamas neglecting. Another thing to consider is that Rome was not built in a day. It's okay if things take time.
And I saw you walking the line, and the truth may come as a surprise. Now with you I feel alive.
I think that I should explain something to those of you that might be watching this video and following my channel and wondering how I do what I do. I think I should explain that I didn't become all of this overnight. I had time to become who I am and learn what I have learned. I got a very early start in homemaking, which gave me a leg up, and so I've had time to build one skill upon another. Some people start their homemaking journey and they don't get to ease in like I did. They basically get pushed in, and they already have families. They've got kids. Some of them are starting to try to homeschool, not all, but some. And I wanted to say that's harder. That's much harder. I kind of had it easy since I didn't get to ease in. I have time to build my family and add things in slowly as I was able. I also want to share that there are seasons in motherhood, and some of them are really hard. And if you've got a kid under 2, you're in one of those seasons. So when I had 4 kids, I definitely was not homesteading or gardening. I might have had a few homesteading activities, but I was not doing all that I'm doing right now. Okay, so I just wanted to share that. I also want to share something else that I think really needs to be said. Okay, I think a lot of people are going to be able to relate to this, especially if you are a homemaker. Growing up, one of the people I looked up to and wanted to be just like was my step-grandma. She was a superstar to me. She was a legit, bona fide 1950s housewife, and she did all the things, almost. So I did the same thing that I think a lot of us do when I became a homemaker. I think a lot of us have idealized things about those 1950s housewives that we don't realize we've idolized. So I would like to expose a few things about those 1950s housewives that you might not know, or maybe you haven't thought of. Although I deeply respect and admire my grandmother's generation, and although I do strongly believe in being a homemaker for our families, and I believe that this is a ministry, I think it's really important to keep it real. As a homemaker and a homeschool mom as well, it's even more important to acknowledge that those 1950s homemakers were not homeschooling. I see so many mamas these days putting impossible standards on themselves to keep the perfect home, the perfect homeschool, and not miss a beat. I've made this mistake myself. So many homeschool mamas especially are sleep deprived with small children and wondering why they cannot keep up the way their moms and grandmas may have. It's because in a lot of situations, their moms and grandmas weren't doing all that they are trying to do now.
Mount Laurel high fives for miles in spring. Rainbow trout and a hummingbird wing. Golden, I'll follow only golden. Golden, golden things. Gold hair, gold rings, gold leaves, gold anything, golden. I'll follow only golden, golden, golden.
I'm going to tell you another somber fact that I learned from my 1950s housewife grandma one day. She shared with me that many of the women of her generation were consistently overprescribed psychotropic drugs. I think I said that right. Valium, okay? I think that was the drug of the day. It's common knowledge that many of the women of that generation were taking drugs like Valium. So remember that. The next time you get to feeling down on yourself and your homemaking abilities, remember not to compare yourself to your grandmother, who you thought did it all but maybe didn't. The next thing I'd like to share and kind of disclose is that I kind of hit on this a little bit earlier, but it takes time. It takes time to learn the skills of homemaking and balancing families and parenting full time. It doesn't happen overnight. Fortunately for me, as I mentioned, I got an early start, which helped. My first job was actually learning to make bread and making it for a neighbor. And of course, my mother taught me this, and I remember it well. I was only 10. It was hard work stirring that dough with little stringy spaghetti 10-year-old arms. And at 14, my mother got sick, so I took over everything except for running the laundry. It helped that I was fascinated by everything having to do with home economics, and I made it my mission to learn everything having to do with homemaking that I could possibly learn. So you see, I had been a homemaker for more than 10 years before I even became a mother. That gave me a really big advantage. I did not start from a place of leaving the workforce and going directly into motherhood with a gaggle of children and, homemaking. As I said, I've had time to build the skills I have, and I've built them one by one. So no, I don't have help. There's no grandparents that take my kids. And if you're new to homemaking, my biggest piece of advice would be that if you're feeling overwhelmed, step back and add things in one by one. Take baby steps. Also, remember the thing I said about seasons in homemaking and motherhood. And there's some seasons where really big things are happening, but it seems like everything is moving really slowly. It can feel really unproductive in those times, and that can cause a lot of moms' anxiety. So if you're in a season with a variety of small children, then you're probably in survival mode, and that's okay. It won't always be that way. It will get easier. In addition to that, life can bring traumas. There's ups and downs that you have to compensate for. So if you are just getting used to homemaking and you're feeling like a failure, please give yourself some grace and give yourself some time. One of the biggest mistakes I've seen people make when it comes to the concept and the art of homemaking is to grossly underestimate the complexity of the job. It's not a job that comes with training like other jobs either. Another thing about it is you're essentially on the same plane as somebody who's self-employed, which means you have to be self-motivated. That right there is what trips up a lot of people. You can always tell the people that have never done homemaking or tried it and hated it and failed because they're the ones that think homemakers don't do anything all day. The truth is that successful homemakers are some of the hardest workers out there. Many are working 13 to 17 hours a day. And I think I talked a lot about this in my previous video, which you can watch. It's got some of the tips that I've learned in my past 30 years of homemaking. Another thing is I don't do everything myself. From the time my kids have been little, I've been teaching them. And although I haven't been as diligent about it as I know probably a lot of mamas out there, my kids have become quite helpful, and I'm able to call them in and have them help make dinner sometimes or help out with the garden. I know in a lot of these clips you see just me. The reason for that is because this is my project, my YouTube channel. It's not my kids, and I like to protect their privacy. But the truth is that we do a lot of things as a family together, and that is part of the reason we wanted to homeschool and wanted a big family and wanted to homestead, was for the togetherness and to create memories and bonding times together. So no, I don't do it all myself. My family and I do things together. I have a Bible verse that I want to share. It helps me, and it helps me remember that there's a bigger thing happening, and it helps me just keep going when it is hard to do this job. This is Philippians 2:3-4. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. I think this verse applies really well to homemakers. I mean, essentially that is what we are consistently doing, is dying to ourselves and learning to be less selfish. Now, on that note, I want to say there's a difference between self-care and being selfish, okay? So don't get me wrong on that. In fact, I have some videos on the importance of self-care, and I will try to remember to link to those below this video. There's one more verse I do want to share though, and it's Proverbs 31:27. She watches over the ways of her household and doesn't eat the bread of idleness. This work of homemaking, being a homemaker and a mother, it is important work, and it has an eternal value, and I think that it's so easy to forget that in the midst of the world, the way that things are, and the society pressures that are on so many of us. You guys, in this line of work, you have to take joy. It's not going to come to you. It's not going to easily happen. You have to intentionally go around your home and your day, and you have to choose joy. And it's like a muscle that you are working out, and eventually it gets easier and easier and easier to find joy and motivation in this job. Something that I have been finding is that I struggle with overwhelm easy. I have anxiety, chronic anxiety, so for me it's very easy to get overwhelmed. One of the things that I find helps is I do have these posters posted in my office, and I will try to remember to link to those below for you, and they teach me some steps to take. But one of the things that I find helps is to pray against the spirit of overwhelm. Also, gratitude. Going around my home, being thankful, even if the room is under construction, or, you know, if my kids are loud and, you know, they're just being really unruly or something in the day, to be grateful, to find gratitude. And also just to pray, because God knows what it is that's overwhelming us, and He doesn't want us to feel overwhelmed. He actually specifically says that in the scriptures. So I hate to sound like a broken record, but talk to God. Cast your anxieties on Him, throw them on Him, and whenever it comes back, which maybe it'll be 5 minutes, maybe it'll be an hour, maybe it'll be tomorrow, but every time it comes back, if you can make a habit of just taking it to Him and trusting, eventually it can make a difference.